Hello and welcome to the top 10 most likely unseen issues for the November 2017 Strategic Case Study exam on luxury watch manufacturer Steelcast. So before we start, I'm just going to go through a bit of an introduction to this particular video and where I've got the information on and what you need to do with said information. So how have I come up with these top 10? Well, first of all, you look at the focus in the pre-scene. If there's a lot of material in the pre-scene on a certain topic, then it's likely that there is some kind of importance of that topic. It's likely to be brought up in the exam, so there's more to talk about. And that feeds into the second point here, the degree of importance attached to it by the examiner. But that particular section extends beyond purely what's in the pre-scene, but also what CIMA like to examine. For example, ethics. It may be that there's no real mention of ethics in the case study, but ethics is considered very important by CIMA, and therefore they are likely to examine it. Next is the strategic importance. How important is it to the organization? If a certain topic is very important to the company, for example, say their suppliers. If they rely very heavily on a certain supplier, then it's likely that there might be an issue on the supplier. If something were to happen to that supplier, what impact could that have on the business? And also, just a more general experience in doing these videos in creating mock exams and reviewing exams in the past, the typical kind of issues that come up, and what kind of things have the examiner brought up in the past. And my final point here is about how easy it is to write issues on that subject. The people who write the exams are obviously people too, and they will go for ones that they know, that they can write good questions on. So what do you need to do for these issues? Well, first of all, it's important to prepare key models. So this will be things like your SWOT exam, like SWOT analysis, like your PESTLE analysis. Because building up this information now will help you to adapt the new information given you in the unseen, or help you to have that context to apply the unseen material. Next thing you need to do is practice exam questions on these issues. This will help you to understand the kind of questions that will be asked around these topics and how to answer them. And also, this next section here, it will help you to plan these answers in your mind so that when you go into the exam and you start writing, you'll already have a background in which to apply this new information. You'll already have certain points to bring up in your head as you're writing for them. And I've also put some more generic things here, such as the advantages and disadvantages of these certain topics, where they would be used and how models can be used to support them. So let's move on to the top 10 issues now. So on to my first issue, issue number 10, which is on funding. Now, the reason why I've chosen funding is because it's a key F3 topic. It's the main way in which the CIMA examiner will test your F3 knowledge, particularly when in relation to other questions. Now, finance on funding may not come up as its own individual self-contained topic, but often it will come up as a concluding factor to another question. So perhaps investing in a new project, producing a new product, buying a certain company, you have to consider the funding for it. How will it be financed? And of course, it tests several different things, such as equity funding, debt funding, the cost of capital as well, whether it's an appropriate cost of capital used, and also ties in with the dividend policy of the organization. If it's paying too much out in dividends, perhaps it needs to start retaining more earnings. It was also mentioned as part of your role in CIMA's Strategic Case Study Guide. And as I mentioned during the pre-scene video series as well, you always have to consider the funding aspect as a conclusion to anything that you are discussing. Because of course, if it's not feasible, it's not financially advisable, then as accountants it should be something that you are saying, no, this is not a good idea. and it regularly comes up as well, particularly as an add-on issue to other questions, just as I have described. And cash is often needed by businesses to support any kind of new investment project, and we expect across several of the variants at least there to be some sort of investment opportunity, because that is the kinds of things that you as management accountants will be doing for organisations. And so likely issues to arise could be long-term funding required for a project, to invest in new products, to purchase a supplier, to purchase a smaller competitor perhaps, and also needed for organic growth and investment and internal growth. Perhaps we want to purchase newer production machines. Perhaps we want to bring on some more staff members who all take high salaries because of the skills and the knowledge that they have. And we need to have more cash reserves to pay for all that. Short-term working capital as well. During the pre-CIMA analysis, we saw that the working capital cycle was very high, 111 days, the working capital cycle. So essentially, they're not turning their resources into cash for over nearly 4 months. And as a result, perhaps they have to have a certain amount of buffer cash in their cash and cash equivalents as part of their financial strategy, a prudent financial strategy, to ensure they always have money to mitigate the impact of negative cash flows. And just as I said on the first page, funding often is likely as an add-on issue rather than an entire issue in itself. You're unlikely to be asked a full-blown question just purely on funding. So some key points from the pre-CIMA: that in the financial statements they had $647 million H. Now, a lot of that will be needed for working capital when you consider trade payables. Trade payables were nearly half of that figure. And of course, trade payables need to be paid to ensure good relations with our suppliers. And the cash will also be needed for monthly wages. Salaries have to be paid month on month regardless of how much income. And just as I was saying, that given that we have a high working capital cycle, given that we don't turn our resources into cash for nearly 4 months, but wages still have to be paid on a monthly basis, we need to ensure that we have cash available for our staff, even if we are not making any money in a particular month, or we have negative cash flow in a particular month. But with regards to long-term funding, perhaps if they want to raise additional debt financing to pay for a large product or a large project, gearing is currently 26 or 35%, depending on which method you use, whether you use debt over equity or debt over debt plus equity. I would advise you that both are acceptable, provided you explain which one you are using and that you always ensure you use the same one. Although you could also argue that they're unlikely to want to take on additional debt financing, given that they have just paid off so much of their debt. But they do have significant assets on the balance sheet, nearly $4 billion in H dollars, which they could use as security with a bank to perhaps reduce the interest rate to ensure they get a significant amount of funding. If we need hundreds of millions of H dollars to invest in a grand new project. And this is the suggested order that I always advise you stick to when raising funds. Obviously, using the cash you have available is the best possible way, particularly if it's only small little projects, just a few million H dollars here and there. But this is obviously dependent on the cash flow analysis. If it shows that we're about to enter a period of negative cash flows, then you wouldn't want to use that money because you'll need it. Failing that, the best thing to do is to use debt funding secured against your assets with the bank. And then finally, equity. Now, the reason why equity is last is because it can be very expensive. You have to go through the process of offering rights issues or issuing more shares to the market. And it can take a long time for you to get to actually see that money. And of course, equity funding, you need to think about stakeholders as well, because if you issue more shares, then you have to agree that with some of your shareholders because of the fact that it waters down their holding. And different theories to use when discussing funding, the main one being the advantages of debt and equity. Now, of course, we know that debt is quicker, we know that it's low cost, but interest payments have to be paid back. We saw our finance costs were very high. We paid out $138 million in finance costs last year, and even then that was a decline on the year before. Whereas with dividends, with the capital that we raise through equity, we don't actually have to pay it back. So equity can be suitable for very long-term plans because of the fact that it may save us money in the long run. And Bendlow's matrix can also be used here because, of course, key shareholders, main shareholders, are key players of your organization, and banks can also be key players, or they can at least be those with high power. They may not have too much interest in your organization, provided you are paying your interest back, but they have a lot of power, particularly if they have security raised against your assets. If you do not pay your interest payments, they can seize those assets, and that could really impact the organization. So next topic, issue number 9, is another topic that's likely to be an add-on issue with any kind of project, is risk management. Again, just as funding is a key P3 topic, risk management is a key F3 topic and may involve identifying risks, assessing those risks using various risk mapping techniques, and also assessing the internal controls of the organization. This is a very regularly examined and recently examined. There was risk management in the previous case study, particularly when you consider the fact that it's part of your role, just as with funding, and it's something that you need to consider for most things that you are looking at. Anytime you're concluding on a particular investment appraisal or project or strategy decision, we need to consider the risks and the impact of that new strategy. And there was even a section in the pre-scene covering risks. It wasn't that comprehensive, and those of you who watched the pre-scene video series will have seen we added many more to that list, but it still shows that the examiner is considering risks. It shows that the examiner is insisting that you learn a few of the key risks of the organization, which means that perhaps it's likely that a question surrounding it will arise. And these are the ways in which it could come up. Could ask you to identify the specific risks on a specific project, or it could ask you to assess the risks towards the organization as a whole. And once you've done that, you need to think about how those can be managed. So perhaps bringing different risk methods, such as the COSO risk methodology, or perhaps the TARA model, or risk mapping techniques, etc. How that allows us to prioritize the importance of certain risks over others. The role of the audit committee that we know the organization has to oversee and control risk, and it's up to them to install a cultural mindset towards risk management as well, and that way it takes care of itself rather than it having to be something that is in the need of constant supervision and constantly trying to force people to do it. And so some key points that came up in the pre-scene relating to risks: competition, the growth of alternatives and substitutes. Mentioned that we do not necessarily compete directly with other luxury watch manufacturers, but we do compete with different types of luxury product, such as luxury cars, luxury suits, antique furniture, etc. Strategy of the organization. It even mentioned that there are plenty of untapped markets that they have not dealt with or that they have not explored, which of course could be a failing in strategy, as it's the whole purpose of directors, the whole purpose of good strategy, to identify areas in which you could expand the business, improve the business. Lack of development as well ties into that. Changes in consumer trends, particularly towards smartwatches, but then for every risk there is also an opportunity to get involved in that market. Legal issues surrounding copyrights and counterfeits. Exchange rates, specifically mentioned in the risk document, but at the same time the controls were quite limited. It said that it was aware of it, it said that it takes note of it, but it didn't show how it actively tries to hedge against it. And perhaps the biggest risk to reputation, because of course reputation is everything to this kind of organization. It's the only reason why people buy or people spend so much money on these kinds of products, because they want to be part of the image, they want to buy into the image. So also mentioned the importance of risk management at strategic level and the importance of risk methods as well, and how to control some of these risks. So don't just say, well, we can control theft by installing CCTV or installing a system that people have to sign in and out whenever they are going in and out of the stockroom. Explain why that will help the risk. Why it will help. It will reduce because people will be aware of the security and that thus won't take those risks. By having a signing in and out process that accurately documents everything that should be going in and out of the warehouse means that we'll be able to identify when things are missing. And so some key theories to use. Obviously the COSO risk cube is one of the big ones that you'll have learnt during P3. Now what I would say is don't go through every single step of the document, every single step of the COSO risk method, because you're not being tested on your ability to regurgitate knowledge. You're being tested on your ability to apply it. So explain why risk methods and internal controls help with the organization. Don't go into explicit detail about every single part, because that will waste so much time. If you have to talk about all of these things here, then all these bits here, and all these bits here, you'll spend your entire hour just writing out the theory behind the COSO cube, which of course is not what you're being tested on. Also the TARA model, so transfer, accept, reduce, and avoid. That can be quite a good way of assessing the risk at the end. You can discuss ways in which you can perhaps transfer it via insurance, via outsourcing, accept it that it's just part of this business, ways in which you could mitigate it, and also you could just avoid it by not going into the business altogether, that particular industry or that particular market altogether. The importance of the audit committee as well. The audit committee only had 2 members, where perhaps that's a weakness in itself, and the audit committee should have 3 members, all non-executive directors. And also risk mapping. Now, there wasn't a risk register in the pre-scene. They had a risk report, but a risk mapping or a risk register is a more comprehensive way of doing it, because it assesses the impact and likelihood. And this allows you to prioritize things. If something is a 5 out of 5 for impact and a 5 out of 5 for likelihood, then this is something that really needs to be addressed. Whereas something's a 1 for impact and a 1 for likelihood, it's something that is not even going to impact the organization in the very unlikely chance that it happens. So that's the kind of thing that should be at the bottom of your priorities with regards to risks. We shouldn't be wasting hundreds of thousands of dollars stopping that particular risk from happening, because it's not really a concern of ours. So I hope you've enjoyed this sample video and more importantly found it useful. Before I go, I'd like to quickly tell you about a few of the products that we do here at Astranti Financial Training, specifically for our case study courses. We have a study text which details all the key theories in which you will be expected to use in your case study exam, as well as details of how to approach the pre-scene and the case study. We also have a series of course videos detailing how to answer case study questions. This is actually an area in which many students struggle. Most of the scripts that I've seen, the failing scripts that I've seen, has actually been due to poor case study technique rather than lack of knowledge. We also have a series of pre-scene analysis videos based on the current up-to-date pre-scene, detailing all the key bits of information and likely issues you may face in the exam. Next up is the industry analysis, a pack detailing information about the industry that the pre-scene company resides in, information about the key players within that industry, and more background information on the industry in general. We also have a range of mock exams created for each level and based on the current pre-CIMA, which is a great way to get some practice in before you sit the real thing. We also offer marking and feedback on those mock exams so you can see where you are going wrong and where you can improve. Finally, we have the master classes. These are 2 one-day classes taken by our expert tutors to give you all the hints and tips you need to really add to your chances of passing the exam. Also, if you take our full course, we offer a pass guarantee, which, provided you have met all the requirements of the pass guarantee, you will get a free resit on the next exam should you fail to pass. So once again, thank you for your time. If you're interested in any of these products, please visit the website www.astranti.com for more information. Thank you.